Hello, everyone, and welcome to, well, whatever this will be. This is not a TED Excellence, just to put that as a predicate. Today, I'm looking at an old friend of my channel, Dr. Chris Hoff. Dr. Chris Hoff, aka the Radical Therapist, was a subject of mine on several videos early on in my channel. I have a playlist on my channel called Gnarly Counseling that showcases all of those. And I've been keeping an eye on him over the last few years. He hasn't posted much on YouTube recently that looked interesting to me, but he has been maintaining a podcast. And I am subscribed, at least to his Twitter account. And so occasionally I see little posts from him about things. But a few days ago, he posted a new episode of his podcast regarding whiteness. And I've always been curious about the psychoanalytical aspect of our society. A lot of people seek therapy on different things. I know I have in the past for a brief time. And, I do TEDx talks and business people and educators and such. And they talk about how they're integrating certain concepts into their business or to their curriculums and so on. But, I get a lot of questions about the state of my sanity doing TED Excellences. But I'm also curious to know, what are people actually being counseled on in their personal, private mentalities when it comes to some of these woke concepts these days? And so when I saw this podcast subject matter, I thought that might be interesting to look at. Now, a few things before we go into this. First and foremost, this is a conversation between two people. It's not scripted or anything. There's probably going to be some chit chat and some crosstalk, and I can't really edit it out because I haven't listened to this before. I took out the opening music because I don't know if that's copyrighted or something. So it's going to start very suddenly when we get there. Another thing too is that the entire podcast, this episode, runs just under an hour. Now, if you know anything about my previous TED Excellences, you can take a 10 or 15-minute TEDx presentation, and with my commentary, can stretch out into an hour and a half. So just imagine what an hour's worth of podcast can turn into. With that in mind, I am only going to go for an hour and a half at most, okay? Unless for some reason I feel compelled to continue further. I figured that they will get through the meat of their initial arguments or observations or whatever within that span of time. I'm not going to go through the whole thing unless I'm just amazed or somehow hooked by what they're talking about. Now, I may go less than an hour and a half if it bores me, because I don't know what to expect here. I've never heard Chris Hoff unfiltered. So that is the sort of Surgeon General's warning I will give you ahead of time for those of you listening to this in the future, or those of you who have joined me right now. And I am surprised that some of you have joined me right now, given the earliness of the hour on a Sunday. But real quick, hello, Rotten Corpse, Deco, Havoc, Vladimir Stalinov, Mike Savage, Zaubla, No Room for Squares, Luke Skywalker 2, Stargazer Nuts, Ken Batter, P-Dog Knight, Orcole de Stefano, Zombie Teddy, Brutus Zealgold, Sinatra Says, Jaeger Pony. But yeah, so if this doesn't interest you, if you prefer a TEDx kind of thing, I understand. This is my curiosity. This is my curiosity to know about something that I don't usually look at that often, and that is mental health professionals. I don't usually see those in TEDx's, or if they are there, they're not talking about things that catch my eye. So anyway, all that being said, gayest person on YouTube, hello. Joys of Sorrow, hello. So per usual, I will do a quick sound test to make sure you guys can hear it. What I had to do is I had to take the audio from the podcast and I attached it to a photo of the two speakers so that you at least know who's talking here. So that's why you see what you see. There's not going to be a lot of visual action in this video. And also I changed the background from the usual moonscape to, post-apocalyptic wasteland. Like mental health care these days. Anyway, first couple seconds, and then you guys tell me if you can hear it.
we have a great one for you today. We're meeting with Dr. Natasha Stovall, who wrote the very important article, Whiteness on the Couch.
Whiteness on the Couch. Whiteness on the Couch. You guys hear that okay? Joys of Sorrow, so Los Angeles, gotcha. Yeah, I think he is out of California. Sounds good. All right, guys. So again, I'm only going to go for about an hour and a half at most, unless for some reason this thing really grabs me. And I may go less if it doesn't grab me. But we'll find out together. So let's learn about whiteness.
I've been thinking, after I first read it, I've been thinking about it for a long time, and just reached out to Natasha, and she just was wonderful about making time. And this is just a really important conversation, and I think you're going to really enjoy this. Before we get there, I have a quick announcement.
Okay, just as a reference, Dr. Hoff spent a lot of time, at least in the initial videos that he put on his YouTube channel, decrying patriarchy and white privilege and white fragility and so on. And so he's steeped into this stuff quite a bit. If you take a look back at the videos I've done previously on Dr. Hoff on the Gnarly Counseling playlist, you'll see he has a very... Now, admittedly, I am not a mental health professional, obviously. I watch TEDx's willingly, so I can't claim that. However, listening to his reasoning and how he works through or justifies why he does what he does always makes me question how he sees himself. And in fact, he brings up himself in several instances in the old videos. But it's one of those things, when you listen to how someone projects to you how the world works, I always wonder, how do they move through the world with that perspective? Thank you. This is Kyle. Hello, chat people and scribbles. Hello, Kyle. All right.
I'm on Patreon, and I just want to let you know that.
Yeah.
What I'm doing is kind of creating content and putting it on Patreon.
Oh, wow.
Patrons.
Wow, imagine that.
People that are interested in supporting my work. And so for the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can get some content.
Price of a cup of coffee.
That I'm doing. I just posted something on the common discourses around sex that you find in the therapy room.
Which sex in the therapy.
I took some of the work of Dr. Chris Donahue, a former guest on this podcast. And
sorry, guys, I don't know where to edit out this introductory stuff. I didn't want to lose anything important. So we just got to go through his spiel a little bit, and then we'll hopefully get to the meat of it.
Kind of broke it down and talked about some of those discourses, not all of them, but some of them you're going to find while working in the therapy room, talking about sex and the influence of sex and the influence of sex in our culture.
Sex in our culture.
I think you'll find that helpful, and you're going to get podcasts early.
Yeah.
I'm going to do another thing. I'm filming something on Way of Being this weekend, and I hope to have that up on the Patreon site.
I hope he posts more like YouTube videos like he used to do back in the old days, because those were nice, short, succinct little overviews of what he was thinking or what he was promoting, or what studies had inspired him to start telling people about their inherent flaws or how they're contributing to the downfall of society and things like that.
This week. So if you're interested in just kind of checking out some of the content that I'm going to be putting together for the price of a cup of coffee, go to Patreon and search The Radical Therapist and go find me there. And your support, of course, is always appreciated.
Yes, I know.
So without further ado, let's get to our show.
Yes, let's.
Dr. Natasha Stovall is a writer and a clinical psychologist and the director of Parent Works, practicing in New York City. She does a lot of other things. But very interesting, very wonderful writer. So without further ado, let's meet Dr. Stovall.
Okay, so we're going to get to that in a second. Luke Skywalker 2. So I assume no TED Excellence today, Scribe. No, I'm going to take a day off from TED Excellence. I thought I'd take a diversion and do something a little bit different. Something I've been thinking about listening to for a while now, because I'm curious. So I might do a TED Excellence tomorrow. We'll see, but I'll let you guys know.
All right, Dr. Stovall, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for being here and making the time. I really loved your article, Whiteness on the Couch, and I think it's so important. So I appreciate you taking the time.
That's why we're here. Whiteness on the Couch. All right, so let's find out, hopefully, how people are being therapeuticalized about their whiteness.
To
Thank
meet
you.
with us. Yeah. And I'm just going to get right into it. You start your article pointing to an old saw about therapy, that the thing you don't talk about is the thing, and that you meet mostly with white people struggling with all sorts of problems, and you talk about everything except being white. And I
Wow, we're starting off strong. Thank you, No Room for Squares. Watch most of Curriculum of Fear. Great work. It's alarming what's going on in education. Yeah, I mean, and like I've pointed out, I think just last night, a lot of those Curriculum of Fear videos are now 3 or 4 years old, and yet it's only gotten more pervasive. You know, if you some of those things which they talk about sort of in hushed tones in some of those classroom meetings, it's mainstream now. And you can listen to that stuff, and it'd be different. You know, if you didn't know it was several years old, I think you'd be hard pressed not to think this was something that was published yesterday. But anyway, so our speaker has a lot of white patients, and you know the thing about psychology is you don't talk about the thing is you don't talk about the thing. You know, you try to avoid it, get around it, you work towards it or something, but you just come out and confront the fact that they're white. I can't wait for this. Okay,
I guess, why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I guess to begin with, I think that's sort of how we're trained. Like I'm a therapist,
yes,
and I'm also a white woman.
Uh-huh.
And so, or, you know, another way to put it is a non-black or brown or non-person of color.
Another way of putting it is a non-black or brown, a non-person of color. Yes, I guess that is one way you could put it, elsewise, to being a white person, if that is supposed to matter.
Woman, assigned at birth, female.
Assigned, oh, but where we're going for it. We're going down the ramp here, aren't we? Okay, so not only is she a white woman, but she's assigned at birth female. Oh boy.
And cis, you know, hetero woman.
Yeah.
And you know, I think in the world that I was raised in,
yes,
we actually talked a lot about race and race relations, which is what, you know, in the 70s when I was born, and, you know, 70s and 80s, that was sort of the language that my family used. And you know, I guess as a culture, we mostly use that.
Yeah.
You know, at least in the culture that I had access to.
Okay.
But we didn't talk about being white exactly, you know.
Yeah, because being white didn't mean anything. Being white. The homeless guy down the street is white. The billionaire is white. The middle class Slovakian is white. I mean, being white. Please tell me you're going to quantify that so we all understand where you're coming from.
You know, or we wouldn't talk about how the culture that we were raised in, which was very much a white European descended culture, would contribute to the problem of racism.
Yeah, okay.
You know, and racial inequality, racial trauma, racial violence. You know, we just didn't talk about that. We talked about the fact that there were these problems and that the white people who created these problems were not us.
Right. The white people who created these problems were not us. So because you're white, excuse me, you have to, what? Accept the blame of the actions of other people simply on the basis of a shared melanin tone, I guess. Thank you, P. Dog Nike. Assigned, I thought female was sex. So confused. Again, just as a note, this is a lady who counsels people, who counsels patients, who takes people into her office, into her care, and assesses them first and foremost, apparently, on their skin color and what they were assigned at birth before they actually look at their psychological issues. Or probably most importantly, and I'm only guessing here from what she said so far, she rates the importance of their personal problems on the basis of their skin color. Just want to put that out there.
You know, I mean, we were not from the places that we considered racism or, you know, racial inequity to be coming from. We were from the other side of that.
Right.
And that was part of how we imagined ourselves as white people.
or you just imagined yourselves as people who weren't racist or weren't hurting anybody? You imagined yourself as white people first and foremost. Okay.
So I guess what I'm getting at is that when people come to therapy, especially most of the people I work with who would identify themselves as liberal, about caring about racism, not feeling racist.
Not feeling racist. Okay.
Certainly not overtly, although I think at this point, there's fewer and fewer people who would identify themselves as, yes, I'm racist.
Oh, you'd be surprised, doctor. You'd be surprised at how many people are willing to throw themselves on the sword of self-pity and hope that by some miracle, such a confession will get them some points somewhere with somebody so they can get laid. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to actually say, I am a racist. Just cut through all of the confusion, set aside any more accusations or uncomfortable conversations, and just sort of throw up their hands in the air and surrender to it. I might as well just say it. Why fight it anymore? I'm only going to be accused anyway. Yeah, those are some pretty sad people.
Right.
And I feel good about it, or I feel okay with it, or that's just how it should be. But most of the people that I work with, I think, would identify themselves as people who are against racism. But it's not something that they want to talk about necessarily in therapy.
Why would they? If I'm coming to you because I have a fear of flying, and I lay down on the couch and I say, doctor, I've got this weird fear of flying. I just, I get on the plane and everything else, and it's just very difficult. Do you understand how privileged you are to be flying on a plane in the first place? Let's examine your whiteness and the fact that you're complaining about being able to fly through the air. I mean, what exactly is wrong with you that you think that this is a problem? This is actually a reflection of the privilege you enjoy in society because of your skin color. So the fact that you're complaining about it is actually racism. I just made that up. Does that sound like something you might imagine extrapolating from what she said so far? Because that's what I did.
I mean, now people are more bringing it to therapy, but for the most part, it's just something that wouldn't come up.
Why would it? I mean, I'm coming to you because I have emotional problems. I have psychological problems. I have family problems. I'm trying to figure out something in my life. Unless something about that has to do with race relations, racism, racial conflict, why would it be brought up? Unless you're bringing it up, or unless you're looking for a way to insinuate it into the conversation with your patients. Why does it have to be brought up?
Right.
So maybe since I wrote the article, I'll say that I don't know if I would say we don't talk about being white as much as we don't talk about racism as a subject.
Yeah.
But encapsulated in that is the fact that white people are the ones that keep racism going.
Oh, so you and Dr. Hoff, I mean, based on the complexion that I see here in your photographs. Oh, okay. You know what? I believe you. I believe that you, as an individual, Dr. Stovall, you perpetuate racism. It got nothing to do with your skin color, though. It's your philosophy. It is your thoughts, your decisions to push this onto your patients who are there to be under your care, making them feel like they have to think of themselves as racist. It's amazing how racism is perpetuated that way.
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And you also write that depending on who you are, the question of whiteness falls somewhere between obvious and sacrilege. And I'm wondering if you could say more about that.
Well, I think that I learned a lot about that, both in my kind of growing up and being lucky enough to grow up in a pretty integrated world, in the sense that I grew up in Washington, D.C. I went to public schools. I went to a church. I lived in a neighborhood that was mostly African-American. I went to a church that was mostly African-American.
So wait, you were lucky enough. You were lucky enough. What do you mean luck? What does chance have to do with any of this? You're white. There's no luck. It's just there. You know, your advantages are there. What do you mean luck? Huh? Does that mean that other people don't luck out like you did, even if they are white? Huh. It's almost like there's no guaranteed sense of security or success or anything. Lucky. Wow. I hadn't imagined she'd bring up chance in any of this.
To schools that were mostly African American and Latino. And so the idea that white people had like their own funny ways in addition to being racist.
Okay, white people have their own funny ways in addition to being racist. Okay.
You know, but also just kind of like, I mean, I guess this is the ultimate stereotype, but like not dancing well, but like also just kind of like being individualistic or kind of not having big parties or like, you know, having different music, different socializing, different food. Like that was not a foreign concept because of course, when you're not in the majority, then that becomes that's a more comfortable concept.
I have no idea what you just said. Individualism is a white people attribute? Something? What? Okay, so she's got a whole litany of racial stereotypes in her head about white people. Okay. Got it.
You know, like that you're different, we're different, we're all different, we're all still here sharing this space.
Yeah.
But, you know, like difference is normal, I guess. And so it was more normalized that white people had their own differences. So like in that context, that felt like obvious. You know? And then in other contexts, like I've noticed in some of the responses to my article, you know, I guess I'm talking mostly about responses from white people.
Oh, imagine that. You write an article about whiteness on the couch, and some of the more skeptical and or perhaps adversarial comments you get are from white people? That's amazing, especially if you promote the idea that you have to talk about race in your counseling session just because the patient's white, even if they're not there for anything that has to do with anything racial. Obviously, it's unavoidable because, you know, white people are all racists, I guess. Thank you, Lancelot652. Hi, Scribe. Just saw that you're streaming. I'll have to catch up later and throw some money for the Pepperjack Fund. Sounds like you'll need it. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. You know, I've talked about this on various shows several times. You know, in my early 20s, I developed anxiety disorder, which, you know, kind of runs in my family to a certain extent. I won't go into all that. I've done it before. But the benefit, if there was any benefit in my situation, I had the awareness that what was going on with me was not natural. Well, that means natural, but I mean, it was not willful. It was not something that I was doing of my own accord. I was reacting irrationally, but I could see that I was being irrational. And this conflict between my rational mind and my demon, as I called it, was a constant fight all the time. And so I became very, very cognizant of my own sort of personal psychology in the absence of actual therapy, because I didn't want to get help. I didn't want to, you know, I mean, I was fighting it every day, but it felt like a defeat if I was going to start, you know, using medication or going off to therapy or something. I wanted to be able to handle it on my own. You know, it's that individualist philosophy that obviously all white people have. And, you know, over the course of time, I was able to manage, but that's it. That was the totality of my existence for about 15 years, just managing, right? I mean, I held down a job, I held down relationships, sometimes not very effectively, and I'll never know how much of my anxiety disorder contributed to that. But, you know, I was able to be a productive individual, and I managed. And I managed, and I self-analyzed, and I self-reflected, and I managed, and I managed. And when I finally decided this is not any way I can continually live for the rest of my life, then I sought out help. And I was very lucky. The medication I got, I can't call it anything other than a magic bullet. It just happened to be the exact right thing for my situation. And I did go to therapy for a while. I did go to a counselor for a while because I didn't know, once I was on the medication, if the person I was in the absence of my anxiety was a good person or was a functional person. I didn't know. I hadn't known that person for 15, nearly 20 years at that point. So I find this stuff very important because people like me who, go to therapy as a last resort or something, or because I really think I need it. I need a check. I need someone. I need a third party uninvolved. I really need an objective assessment of where I'm at from somebody who knows what to look for in things. And so when I hear something like this from a medical professional, mental health professional, talking about this, I just imagine, what if I had gone to her in that time of, I need an assessment because I am my own worst witness, right? And so I would trust this person to give me some feedback. Now, imagine if I ended up with this lady in the situation I was in, and she started railing off about my skin color and my privilege and my inherent racism and so on and so on, when I just want to find out, is a non-anxiety scribe a healthy person? That's the lens I'm looking at this through. What if that was me going to her for that situation?
Sure.
That this is very wrong. Like, it's racist in and of itself to say that, like, white people are at all different. That
what?
To point out
you've been getting those kind of responses. Yeah.
I get those responses sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, not directly from.
Wait. So wait. You bring up an example, but it's not an example that actually happened. I'm going to back up. I'm sorry, guys. I lost the plot there for a second. She was talking about the responses she got to her article. Let's try that again.
Sure.
That this is very wrong. Like, it's racist in and of itself to say that, like, white people are at all different.
Well, if you are promoting stereotypes on the basis of skin color, that is racist in a way. It might not be. I mean, if you're telling a joke, or if you're like, there's a certain thing about this culture or something else, or you see this oftentimes and people like, yeah, maybe there's something there, depending. But if you're saying all white people do X or all white people are racist, that's racist.
To point out,
you've been getting those kind of responses. Yeah.
I get those responses sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, not directly.
Not directly.
People, face to face.
Oh.
But I do see that online.
Oh.
And I hear of those responses. But also I think some people of color also have said, like, it just seems like this is an over focusing on whiteness, which I think is a different kind of response.
A different kind of response. Well, okay, if someone's saying you're assessing all white people on one standard, therefore that's racist, well, they'd be right for the most part. And then other people saying this is a waste of time to focus on skin color. I mean, those are two different responses. That's true. You're very correct. But they all point towards you talking some nonsense.
Because it's not the same as saying there is no difference. But I think the fact that there's just a lot of different responses on a huge spectrum when you start to talk about whiteness as something other than just like sort of the equivalent of racist behavior or racist thought or racist, structural racism.
Whiteness is racist thought. You mean it is a racist thought, or it represents racist thinking? I don't know.
To me, as a psychologist and a therapist, sort of mirrors these kinds of disorganized, like kind of traumatic reactions.
What?
That you see in people or in populations when there's something really wrong happening. Like people's responses to trauma or to any kind of collective upheaval is often, like, initially at least, a very disorganized kind of like, oh my God, what's happening here?
What are you talking about? I mean, like trauma, like being accused of being an inherent racist because of your skin color, that kind of trauma? being held to account for the actions of other people somewhere or somewhen on the basis that they happen to have a skin tone similar to yours, that kind of trauma? What?
You know, like, I can't deal with it. Like, one person, you know, freaks out and starts running around and screaming. Another person goes, hides in a corner.
What?
And so that's why I said that. That's what I was thinking about.
Got it. Well, just
you got it. I didn't get it. And that's my line, by the way.
For everybody maybe that's listening, and you know, because this is a tricky one. You know, what is whiteness?
Yeah.
You know?
Okay. All right. Well, all right. Credit to Dr. Hoff. I mean, that probably should have been the opening line, but all right. Yeah. Tell us, Doctor, what is whiteness, and why is it something that you need to bring into the conversation with your patients?
How would you conceptualize whiteness? Or
Well, I mean, it is a tricky one.
Yeah.
Because I think that it's multiple things at once. And
No. Either it is something or it has no definition. It can't be multiple things at once. There has to be a 1 to 2 sentence description that you can give as an elevator pitch to someone on this concept. If you make it a catch-all for a bunch of different things, then it is just that, a catch-all. It doesn't mean anything. But okay.
it's also nothing.
Okay, I cut her off and I shouldn't have. I want to get that. I want to get the fullness of that statement.
And so that's why I said that. That's what I was thinking about.
Got it. Well, just for everybody maybe that's listening, and you know, because this is a tricky one. You know, what is whiteness? I mean, how would you conceptualize whiteness? Or
Well, I mean, it is a tricky one because I think that it's multiple things at once, and it's also nothing.
I love it. I love it. You know, yeah, I'm not going to need to do the whole talk, obviously, because right there, she just shot herself in the foot, rhetorically. It's everything and nothing all at once. The alpha and the omega. Okay, tell us about the everything and the nothing. And maybe I'll make another never-ending story reference at some point.
You know, like whiteness is actually not anything except, you know, the amount of melanin that's in your skin.
Very good, doctor. Very good. It is a arbitrary, meaningless, biological aspect of one's physical makeup. Very good. You could just stop there. You could just stop there. But this goes on for another 40 some odd minutes, so I assume we're not stopping there. You wrote a whole article about this, so I'm assuming we're not stopping there. Tell us more about what whiteness is aside from melanin.
You know, on some level, that's all it is.
no.
On some level. Okay, well, take me to the next level. I'm dying to find out.
You know, and that's when we talk about white privilege, like that's how it's assigned, usually is simply by whether or not someone's skin is light enough to look like they belong to this group that is kind of organized around the amount of melanin in your skin.
Yes, white people are a group. They are not a demographic. They are organized around the color of their skin because all white people are organized together as a group. Which is why Joe Biden and Donald Trump are besties. Doctor, white people, quote unquote, are a demographic. They are not a group. They do not have membership cards. They do not organize into little clusters in regional chapters simply based on the fact that they are white. There are people that do that, but they fall into a different demographic, and they are a group. Those are called white supremacists, racial identitarians of the white variety. So, doctor, the fact that you see white people as a group who are organized around their skin color and are assigned privilege is amazing. This is some kind of sci-fi.
And of course, some people don't necessarily fully meet that categorization in terms of their socialization, you know, meaning people who are passing as white, you know, but yeah, you know, like I guess technically would be considered in a different category.
Oh,
but
okay. What category would that be? Are you going off of like skin tone gradients at this point? Are we talking about colorism? I'm not quite sure where you're going with that one, Doctor.
At the end of the day, this is just about a biological fact that has only to do with your skin color.
Oh, it isn't. Well, you just said that was all it was a minute ago. That whiteness is many things and nothing. So what is it? I mean, I'm honestly curious to know, how does she define whiteness? How does she apply that to her patients when they lie down on her couch and just happen to be white?
But it's a biological thing that's been turned into a social construct, but it also is like something that really our society that we live in America and in many other parts of the world has actually become an organizing construct, for the society. So that's like the most obvious part.
That is not obvious at all. You have spewed out a bunch of nothing. You have said nothing. You've constructed a conspiracy theory right there, a very wide-ranging and non-specific conspiracy theory of white people and societies being structured around skin color, first and foremost. And yet we know that not all people who are white are on even footing across the board, across the planet. Again, this, and I have to point out a mistake I made. For whatever reason, I forgot to put the term doctor in front of her name under her picture. She is a doctor. She is a therapist. So yeah, the PhD is otherwise, but this is someone who has patience. This is someone who counsels people. This is how she sees the world as a professional mental health professional. Oh boy.
In terms of the psychology, like it's both racism, like that's probably the most urgent aspect of whiteness.
The most urgent aspect of whiteness is racism. Okay, how? How does being white make you a racist? How does one lead to the other, in your view, Doctor?
That needs to be addressed is like this kind of like way in which the amount of melanin in your skin then determines what you have access to, whether or not you're able to go to a decent school, have safe housing, have healthcare, have access to good food, have enough money to buy these things.
Yes, because as we know, all white people have access to good healthcare. All white people have access to good food. All white people have access to good schools. Because of their melanin count. As we know. Got it.
Like in our society, it is a determinative factor of like health and well-being.
No, it is not. Guy I knew, my age, I grew up with him to a certain extent. He killed himself. Yeah. He suffered from, I'm not going to get into the details. He suffered from a disease. It wasn't, it was a genetic, degenerative kind of disease. And rather than put up with it, amongst other things, he killed himself. He was white. But his health care didn't fix him. He wasn't happy. He wasn't living a happy life. Oh, well, that's just anecdotal, Scribe. It's a one-off kind of thing. Yeah, but yeah. And oh, my sister. Oh, yeah, that's right, my sister. Well, she's white. She's white, and she had a medical problem recently, but she went to the doctor, and they're like, oh, yeah, your health insurance doesn't cover this. So instead of something that would have been like maybe a couple $100, turns into a $2,200 decision point investment that may only slightly give her some relief. Does she have $2,200 to just drop down on a maybe? Nope. So she has to take, temporary remedies or something just to kind of cope with it. And those still cost her a couple $100 because they're also not covered by the insurance. Oh, but that's just anecdotal, Scribe. I mean, obviously everybody who's white has all these advantages just given to them right off the bat. There are no poor white people. There are no hungry white people. There are no sick white people. There are no depressed white people. Yada, yada, yada. Sorry, again, who's the racist here?
You know, and livelihood, life itself.
Mm.
On another level,
Yes.
I think it also is a way of psychologically organizing ourselves, and it's organized around power.
Oh.
So that's something that I quote in the article. Neil Altman, who's a psychoanalyst, wrote that, but many other people have written that as well. Like, this is about who has power, a hierarchy, who gets to be at the top, who gets to be at the bottom.
Yeah, you know, I just get to be at the top. My sister just gets to be at the top. You know, my father and my mother, when they were just about having to sell our home because everything fell through at one point, not through any fault of their own, just circumstance. When we were just about 3 steps away from being out on the street, but by hook, by crook, by the skin of my parents' labor and effort, they maintained a home for all of us. Yeah, you know, it's handed things. Everything just comes our way without effort, nothing at all. I'm sorry, I know I'm dwelling on this, but forever this kind of stuff has really bugged me when somebody starts saying, oh, you know, white people, they get everything handed to them. My grandparents, my grandmother went through the Dust Bowl, for God's sake. Both my grandfathers fought in World War II in different ways. My father was stationed in Vietnam. You know, he was in the military. They weren't handed anything. The pictures I have of my family going back like only a couple generations are of, you want to talk about like classic salt of the earth, by the skin of their teeth living kind of situation. That's my heritage. And they weren't handed anything. They worked for everything that they had. They lived very simple, straightforward lives. And everything that they did was for the benefit of their children so that they might have a better situation than they had, and so on. You know, I know it sounds very cliche, but that's how it was. You know? And anything that I've got, any advantages that I had when I was starting out in the world, is a result of their honest labor. But that does not determine my fate immediately. I have to then make the choices for myself going forward as to what kind of life I'm going to lead. You know, and my sister and I, as an example, we came from the exact same household, exact same parents, upbringing, the whole 9 yards. And we have completely divergent lives and completely divergent situations. It doesn't. Sorry, this bugs me. This is like feeling. You know how you ever feel like you're being sidewise insulted, you know, or having the struggles and or the successes of you or your loved ones denigrated in some way for reasons that have nothing to do with them as people. Yeah, you know, that kind of gets on my nerves.
And that's a way of thinking about ourselves as social, interpersonal beings that goes way beyond skin color. It's something that is sort of has to do with how we're parented, how we socialize our children, how we interact with each other, even if there are only white people around.
Oh.
You know, and I think that's an important aspect of whiteness that has to do with, it always still, I think, has to do with an other.
What?
But it has to do with a habit and a kind of way of imagining the world where there always is a scapegoat.
What?
And sometimes the scapegoat is external to the group, and sometimes it's internal to the group, and sometimes it's internal to the family, and sometimes it's internal to the self.
What?
You know, and I think when you're a therapist and you work with mostly white people, a lot of times what you see is a lot of anxiety and a lot of this harsh inner critic, and a lot of self-hate and self-loathing.
And that's inherently white? Self-critic, self-loathing is inherently white. Is that what I'm hearing? Gosh, well, that explains everything with me. God, I wasn't suffering from some kind of genetic hereditary mental disorder. No, it was my whiteness the whole time. Yeah, I wasn't experiencing the same kind of thing that my father was exhibiting when I was growing up. And then my sister had it happen to her too, around the same age. No, it's just that suddenly our bodies realized we were white. Oh my God, what a revelation.
And that's very endemic to our culture and our socialization and acculturation as white people. And it does have to do with othering.
Oh, okay.
And it's a big part of our culture. And
yeah, you keep saying that. You keep saying that it's a big part of our culture, othering. Give me an example. What have you done? How have you operated under this, psychology, given that you're white? I mean, I'd be curious to know if she can speak from her own experience, how she has exhibited these behaviors and this mentality prior to her grand, revelation and enlightenment. Thank you. This is Kyle. Silly Scribe, don't you remember, as one entitled, moronic, and rich young man said, quote, "A homeless man living on the street has more privilege than me," unquote. Yes. Okay. Is she going to, I'd appreciate her giving us some self-reflection at this point and telling us how she has participated in these things. I want to hear some confession here.
It is inherently connected to othering Black people in America.
Yeah.
And in Europe, it was inherent to othering other populations like Jews.
Yeah.
And in the colonial sphere.
Yes.
And, I think there's a lot of ways you can kind of read it.
Yeah.
And it certainly has always been in the service to capitalism and making money and kind of like an exploitative, kind of extractive economic model.
Yeah. Okay. So, so the PhD here, the doctor, the therapist, is telling us about the evils of capitalism now and how that's inherently a white thing. Colonialism is just a white thing. Got it.
But internally, on the psychological level, it lives in this kind of like self-loathing, self-othering, othering within the family. Like the psychological building blocks that make that all seem totally normal.
You're saying nothing. I don't have the TEDx bingo card out because this isn't a TEDx, but ever since he asked the question, "What is whiteness?" And she said, it's just a biological aspect of your melanin count or whatever. And it means nothing. You could have stopped right there. Everything past that point has been utter and total balderdash nonsense. I'll keep listening, but I would be surprised if our speaker here could give us a reasoned, cogent response to his question at this point. She said the same set of words about 2 or 3 times now in different combinations and gotten us nowhere. And this is a professional therapist.
Even though when other groups have come into observation of us, like Africans,
No, I don't know. Other groups have come into observation of us. Us who? Oh, the group of white people? All of us who are the same because we have a similar skin tone? Which is why we have different political parties? Oh, wait, we don't. No. What am I saying? We don't have different political parties. Well, I mean, in all honesty, there's an argument to be made we don't actually have different political parties. But you know what I mean. Because we all get along. We all get along. We're all on the same page. There are no conflicts. There are no differences. There are no, the culture of Texas is exactly the same as the culture of Maine, given the population of white people. So the language sounds the same. The lingo's the same. The traditions are the same from Texas to Maine. because we're all on the same page. We're all the same. We have the same culture.
During the slave trade, or First Nations or Native people during the settler period.
What does any of this have to do with what you talk to your patients about on the couch? Do you go through a whole, slanted history lesson with all of your patients who happen to be white on the couch, just to let them know that they are the descendants of a terrible legacy of slavery and racism, and anything that they're worrying about today is just a product of that, and don't you feel bad for being white? Is that how you treat your patients? Is that what you do? Is that the mindset you put all of your therapy through when you're talking to a patient, so long as they're a white patient? Is that how this works?
Here, they saw us as quite odd and other and strange and dysfunctional.
And we saw them the same way, I guess, because we're two different cultures from two different worlds. What does that have to... Oh, my God. No, I don't know.
And I think that's, probably true.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks true to me as a therapist.
What's probably true? That people are different? That if someone who has been raised in a completely different culture on a completely different continent meets someone from a completely different culture on a completely different continent, and they find odd and unfamiliar differences between one another, that's true? Oh my God. I don't know if I can handle that kind of knowledge, Right. What does that mean? I'm going to project a little bit here. I have to imagine that Chris Hoff is sitting there having listened to all this and not having any idea how to respond to that, is just kind of laughing nervously because he doesn't know where to go with that. And so in this instance, I empathize with Dr. Hoff. That is, unless he now follows that up with some analysis of his own that somehow supports all that nonsense.
That was wonderful.
What was it? Was it wonderful? What was wonderful? Tell us.
Description. Yeah, right.
That was a wonderful description of what? Of what? Whiteness? That long, drawn out diatribe of nothing was a wonderful description of whiteness. Okay. Okay, you guys are the professionals. So as far as I can tell, according to Dr. Hoff and according to Dr. Stovall, what she just said after he asked for a definition description of whiteness, that entire is a wonderful description of it's a biological effect of melanin, full stop, and also I'm learning something.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was okay. So you
just listen to these guys. That was wonderful. That was just wonderful. I don't have a follow-up to that because you didn't say anything. It was wonderful. I'll be polite.
Right, in the face of blatant white racial aggression, which we're experiencing, there's a reflexive instinct among white people to proclaim, hashtag this is not us. But a deeper self asks, how much of this is us?
Yes, a deeper self asks, how much of this is us? When the accusation is levied that witchcraft is in the village, I'm not a witch. But how much of your attitude helps support the witchcraft that is present? And if so, are you not a servant of the devil?
If it is us, who are we? And I'm wondering if you could say more about that idea.
Well, it's funny because when I wrote that, I wrote the first part of it. And then my editor at Long Reads was like, I want you to add that last sentence. So in some ways, that last sentence is sort of a separate thing that has to do with like, what does white mean?
Well, I mean, I don't even understand what whiteness means. So I hope she tells us what does white mean. Maybe we'll get somewhere with this.
Sort of what I was just talking about.
Right.
Like, okay. Who are we? Like, are we, like, because I mean, if you think about white people in the US, there's a huge amount of variety.
There is, but I thought we were a group. I thought we were all organized around our skin color. How can there be a variety?
Like we're very heterogeneous, and
What?
yet we're all unified in some ways in this group, which then is put over and privileged over and hoarding resources or hoarding some level of, and again, there's a huge variety of how much people, how much one white person has privilege and safety and access and resources varies tremendously from another person. So
another person or another white person or okay.
It's like very heterogeneous, yet we all enjoy this like membership in this club.
No, oh my God. We do? Really? Okay, doctor. Well, you know what? I'd like a PhD. I just want a PhD. I don't want to have to work for it. I don't want to have to do any effort or anything. I mean, truth be told, I'm not even sure what effort is actually required to get a PhD these days, given how many people I listen to who have PhDs and they're talking nonsense, like present company included. But I just want a PhD, just officially, not some diploma farm or something. I just want a Harvard PhD and whatever. Well, whatever, just right now. Right now, I'm in the club. I've got a membership. I'm looking at it right now. I'm looking at my palm. I see the skin color there. I want a PhD. Should I just get that? Should I just have that? And if I did get that, if I was handed a PhD, and I believe in white privilege, at that point I would probably have to, doesn't that PhD mean nothing? Doesn't that PhD have absolutely no weight? It imparts no credibility onto anything I have to say or any expertise I may claim. Now tell me, doctor, is your PhD legitimate? How much of your education was handed to you? Or do you want to defend whatever work you put in to earning that PhD? Do you want to legitimize that PhD by saying you worked for it, you weren't handed anything, your life was not just laid out for you on a silver platter? Because the more that you promote the idea that white people inherently just get handed stuff and have resources given to them out of nowhere because they happen to be white and they're taken care of, etc., etc., any accomplishments you may claim to possess or any struggles you may claim to have forged your way through are meaningless, are they not, doctor? Shouldn't you be the last person, given your skin color, to tell anyone else about the realities of racism or whiteness or privilege due to the unavoidable fact that you yourself are white?
That then is like kind of held in superiority to all the other clubs.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of artificial division based on something that isn't real.
Yeah.
But I think that does get at what the first part of the paragraph is about, or the question, which is we're all, let me think about how to say this.
Yes, please do. I would appreciate if you actually thought before you spoke, because so far it just sounds like you're just babbling, honestly.
I think that often when we have these violent incidents, which I sort of list this long line of incidents, going back hundreds of years.
Oh.
That on a sort of more instinctual kind of like visceral, almost like a, neurological level, like the nervous system level, people, human beings react to kind of overt cruelty and violence with horror.
Yeah.
And, kind of,
most
unless
people.
they're extremely sadistic.
Right.
Usually it's, it's not a pleasurable experience
Yeah.
to see like a teenager fire hosed,
okay.
Or, a man being murdered in front of his own daughter.
Yeah.
Even though obviously we know from history that there have been people who have turned up to watch that kind of thing collectively. And that's part of our history as European Americans.
Oh, yeah, because, public executions never occurred in any societies that weren't white. Public lashing sessions or torture or burning people at the stake or something. None of that occurred in any other cultures at any time in the past who weren't white. Got it.
Like lynchings, and then going back to Europe with witch burnings, and like we do have a long history of gathering to watch violent events. I mean,
yeah, like Sunday Night Football, or Tuesday night boxing. Nobody watches that stuff except white people.
We're still kind of doing it.
Oh yeah,
and so like that's a piece of this too.
Mm.
But I think that there is generally this collective recoiling from the very obviousness of the kind of racial hierarchy where over and over again there's this like kind of like, oh my gosh, this is horrible, we shouldn't be doing this, like this is awful.
Okay.
And the I think that has to do with cognitive dissonance, and how much cognitive dissonance is something that is sort of baked into whiteness.
Jesus. Cognitive dissonance baked into whiteness. After she started out her description by saying, well, on one level, it's just the amount of melanin in your skin. It's a biological thing, and that's it. But it's also... Tell me more about cognitive dissonance when it comes to whiteness, doctor.
Or being raised white or bred white, as I talk about.
Bred white.
In the article talking about...
Bread white, and when I hear that, and not white bread, but bread white, that sounds very eugenics, the way she said that. Bread white.
That, like...
No, I don't know.
Socialization of whiteness requires a level of cognitive dissonance.
What?
And tolerating cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. Oh, you are an expert at tolerating cognitive dissonance. I'll give you that. I mean, you have a PhD in tolerating cognitive dissonance. So on that, I will trust you.
And I mean, I think and so sometimes these events will break the cognitive dissonance and people can't maintain it anymore.
Right. So if I see or hear about a situation where someone is harmed in some terrible way and it is fueled by racism, and I know it's fueled by racism, and it's not just a cruel act in and of itself, absent any racist reflex, but anyway, then suddenly my cognitive dissonance breaks, because then I realize, oh, that person hurt that person because of their skin color. Oh, I am a racist now. Is that the line of thinking that you're promoting here? Because that sounds like the line of thinking you're promoting here.
And then one reaction is to deny, like, well, that's not part of who I am, because like the science of cognitive dissonance is really about how do you lower cognitive dissonance. Usually,
wait a second. That's not who I am. Okay. Let's imagine for a moment that we have a situation where one person kills another person specifically on the basis of their race. We know that to be true. We've read their mind, we found their manifesto, whatever, right? Okay. I'm in California, and this occurs in Florida, and I see that on the news, and I think to myself, that's not me. Oh, that's cognitive dissonance? Oh, that was me? That was me? I did that thing? From here to there? I did? Oh, anything else would be cognitive dissonance. Thanks, doctor.
Usually when people are faced with a situation where the cognitive dissonance is too high, their reaction is to try to lower it by any means necessary, so to speak. Like,
can you give us an example? Just something I can sink my teeth into here, because I'm having to guess this whole time.
And usually the lowering it, I don't think I'm explaining this too well, but...
No, you're not explaining anything at all very well. And supposedly you're a professional. I can only imagine the conversations you must have with your patients one-on-one in private. if this is the kind of conversation you're having with a fellow professional. I mean, you know, when two people from the same profession are in a room together and they start talking about work, there's a sense in my mind that at least a quarter of what they're going to be talking about, the kind of language they're going to be using, is the talking shop language. You know, the kind of stuff that is slightly beyond my understanding because I'm not in the profession, right? None of that's here. She's talking babble. It's absolute pablum. It means nothing. But she's the professional talking to another professional. This is incredible.
A lot of times when people think of cognitive dissonance, they think of like, oh, I'm aware of things like aren't sitting right with me, so then I'm going to change it. Mm-hmm. But actually, the science of cognitive dissonance is about the fact that when people become aware that they have two thoughts that are incompatible with each other, they just basically try to change their thinking so that they continue doing the same thing over and over again.
Yes, trying to rationalize your way through contradictory evidence of something and still maintain your thought process. Because in a lot of cases, if you believe a thing to be true and you base your life or some aspect of your interactions with other people or your sense of self on this thing that you believe to be true, and then something comes along and says, you know, actually that's not actually true, or you've been operating under a misapprehension, what do? Especially if you've based your sense of self-worth or your self-esteem or something around this thing. Then somebody says, you get two possible things. Either you adjust your thinking to allow for the new information, which may indeed completely break how you've been operating to that point, or you rationalize away that thing, or you somehow integrate that thing into your current line of logic so that you don't have to change, you don't have to reassess whether or not what you're doing is either correct morally or factually or whatever. Yeah, it's a preservation of the ego in some way, shape, or form, right? So if you have someone who's based their entire life around denigrating whiteness because it's inherently racist, and yet there's all these white people who are different from one another, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different outcomes, different attitudes, different behaviors, different cultures, different beliefs, different qualities of life, and on and on and on coming at you, but you still maintain that whiteness imparts upon people a common shared privilege. What do? You know, it keeps hitting, it keeps ramming up against your thinking. Well, I mean, there's all this evidence that kind of makes what I'm saying sound like nonsense, and yet you're still a professional therapist.
So rather than making a change, people just kind of like lie to themselves in a different way.
Yeah, I think I might be listening to you analyzing yourself right now.
You know, or like kind of devalue something that previously they thought was valuable in order to keep on like doing what they're doing.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that.
Mm-hmm. So I do need to think of some better examples of how to explain cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, you really do, given that you're a professional, you write papers, you counsel patients, and so on and so forth, and you're speaking with a fellow professional. You really should have come prepared for this little talk. If you wrote an article, you'd think that the article itself would have had just cliff notes of what you could say on these subjects. But okay, what do I know?
But I think that what I'm getting at here is like, in order to be white, you do have to tolerate a level of cognitive dissonance that from the outside is hard to understand.
In order to be white. She's talking about herself. I don't know if she knows it. I don't know if she realizes it, but she is talking about herself.
Right.
And then it becomes harder for white people themselves to deal with it when it's so obvious. So one way to deal with it.
Okay, I just as a thought experiment, I'm gonna back up a little bit here. Just as a thought experiment, as all of this is a thought experiment. When she says white people, when she verbalizes the phrase white people, right? I want you to imagine in your head that instead of saying white people, she's saying I, or me, depending on the context. Okay, just think about that for a second, and see how that plays in your head for a moment. Okay.
Making a change, people just kind of like lie to themselves in a different way, or like kind of devalue something that previously they thought was valuable in order to keep on like doing what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So I do need to think of some better examples of how to explain cognitive dissonance. But I think that what I'm getting at here is like, in order to be white, you do have to tolerate a level of cognitive dissonance that from the outside is hard to understand.
Right.
And then it becomes harder for white people themselves to deal with it when it's so obvious. So one way to deal with it is to say, oh, that's not us. I'm not that kind of white person, or this isn't what America is. I mean, this whole debate about the 1619 Project is really about the cognitive dissonance that it brings to the surface, especially in people who are interested in American history, who really don't want to look at how brutal and unfair and not, about liberty American history has been.
The 1619 Project, the racially motivated re-examination of history centering racism as the foundation of America. And the brutality. Oh yeah, we never think about the brutality, of America. Civil War, us killing each other. And what was the majority of the skin colors that were killed during the Civil War in this country? Who did we fight to gain our independence as a country? Oh yeah, white people. Other white people. King George. Yeah. Golly, I mean, weren't we all on the same page during that whole Revolutionary War thing? I mean, we were all white, right?
And so are really doubling down on the idea that like, A, it must not be as bad, like this must be lies, or B, it had to be this way because that's the only way we could have, or we could have done what we did, or whoever we is, right?
No. Whoever we is right now, you're the one talking. This is your example. If you say we and you're explaining something, you must know who we are. Who are we in this? Who is the group? Who is the demographic? When you say they, when you say people, when you say we, who are you talking about? Because every time you say something, every time you give us a pronoun that references some group, I keep replacing it with the words I or me, because I don't know who you're talking about. So I can only assume you're projecting, which is coming from your mind and imagination.
And then also another strategy, which I think Tom Cotton is sort of getting a lot of notoriety right now because of what he's talking about, Senator Tom Cotton saying that, like, well, that's in the past. Like, we don't need to think about it anymore.
It depends on what you mean by that. I mean, if you're talking about holding people who live today to account for the actions of people from hundreds of years ago, and assessing people today on the crimes of people from then simply on the basis of skin color, then no, we don't need to be thinking about that, because it's not relevant to anything happening today, except for the people that want to make it relevant by hanging on to it and using it as a cudgel against people on the basis of their race, which is what you're doing right now.
And all of that is ways of dealing with cognitive dissonance. And so like, this is not us is one way. But then I think it's hard to keep going with that level of cognitive dissonance without a sort of the voice inside being like, but what about, and that's why I think we continue to go through this cycle, is we're not listening to that little voice that's like, something seems wrong here.
We're not listening to that little voice. I hear as I'm not listening to that little voice. All right, so Doctor, obviously then you and Dr. Hoff are responsible for 400 years of historical slavery and oppression. You are. I mean, you're white. You are the inheritors of all the privileges bestowed upon white people as a result of the victimization of other people on the basis of their skin color. If the reality you're painting is true, then the two of you should not be doing what you're doing. You are the most illegitimate people to be counseling anybody on racism or oppression or whiteness or anything else. Is that or is that not true? If I accept the reality you are painting, you need to quit like yesterday. You know?
Yeah.
You know?
You have me thinking of there's Ken, I don't know, Dr. Ken Hardy. He's an academic, right? Oh, you're familiar. Okay.
Yes,
Family therapist. And he talked about, I heard him somewhere talking about, you know, when he sees like an unarmed black man getting killed, for example, that's an image of his symbolic self in some ways, right? So
what? That's an image of his symbolic self? He sees an unarmed black man killed, and that is an image of his symbolic self. And this man is a fellow doctor of some kind, I'm assuming therapy or psychology. His symbolic self is the death of an unarmed black man. Okay, now that is a disturbing notion right there. If someone is operating in their life with that notion in their head.
He gets to see that over and over again. And I'm thinking, like, as a white person, white male, my symbolic self is the cop with the knee on the neck, right? And
What? Your symbolic self is the cop with the knee on the neck. You are taking responsibility. No, hell, you are projecting yourself as complicit in the cop with a knee on the neck. You see that and you say, that's me. I swear to God, guys, I'm not being hyperbolic here. This is disturbing. This is a really disturbing line of thinking.
There is some effect to that, right? And if we don't acknowledge it somehow, like you said, it's going to keep the loop going.
Right. And it's such a hard thing to make sense of on an identity level. And
you're right. It is a hard thing to make sense of on an identity level. If I see someone doing something terrible, and then I decide that's me. Yeah, no, that's a tough one. That's a real tough one.
And I think that's why, which is not to say that people can't try harder.
Oh, I trust me. There are a lot of tryhards out there.
And try
harder to what? Project myself into the role of somebody who's doing something brutal, into the role of a murderer or something, into the role of a sadist. I need to try harder to project myself into the role of a terrible person because they happen to have a similar skin tone. I need to work harder at that, huh? Oh, okay. Oh, golly gee whiz. That is an uphill battle. I'll grant you that.
Reach out more when, like that we can't intervene in the lives of people like Derek Chauvin earlier so that they don't become these murderous police officers. And, and I think that the abolish the police theory is that like being a police officer, period, is going to create these problems.
Oh, being a police officer, period, is going to create these problems. If only we'd intervened in the life of Derek Chauvin earlier. What are you talking about? Okay, I'm only going to give this another 10 minutes, guys. Unless you want to hear more. Okay, and I'll check the chat here in a couple minutes to see if you want me to keep going. I'm fine stopping here. I'm fine keeping it going, but at the very minimum, I'm going to check in into the hour and a half mark.
You know, like the police, you know, by definition, placing someone in that position is going to limit their choices to the extent that inevitably there's going to be, you know, especially in a country like the US, where we have such a long cultural history of policing in a violent way.
What does that have to do with, okay, talking about police reform, and that is a completely different subject. I've done plenty of videos on it. I'm not going to dwell on that, but I'll just come back. I'll come back to the point. What does this have to do with whiteness or whiteness counseling or whiteness on the couch? What does any of this have to do with how you give therapy to your patients? Do you hold your patients who are white accountable for the actions of Derek Chauvin? Is that what I'm hearing?
You know, so, you know, I think that
I don't know. Every time she says, you know, and I understand it is one of those things that's just, it's a pause breaker. It's unconscious for a lot of people. I probably do something similar oftentimes and I don't even notice it, but all the same, it's irritating.
you know, dealing with that aspect of our identity in concert with like, you know, kind of creating some interventions and structures that are going to make it harder.
What?
For, you know, police and other people in positions of authority to have the power to just kill at will is a very important part of the work and the struggle that's happening right now.
Well, I'm really trying to follow this. I'm really trying to listen and follow what she's saying, but she is going all over the map on this. Okay.
Because I think recognizing that that kind of identity is there, and you can't just kind of like implicit bias training it away.
Right.
Yeah, because obviously they're still white at the end of the day, right? I mean, they can't. No matter how much implicit bias training you give, no matter how much training you give to use particular techniques to try to restrain someone or whatever else to keep them safe, but also restrain. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, they're still white. They're still the inheritors of hundreds of years of oppression, racism, and slavery. You know, and me watching it on TV, that's my symbolic self. Is
a big part of kind of the demands right now coming from people who are addressing racial injustice. And on top of that, that's why I think our field needs to be more involved or more intentionally involved, because I think that there's a lot in the work that therapists do that can be useful here.
Like what? I have been waiting for 23 minutes into this talk now for you to explain specifically how you affect this notion into your work. What do you do with a patient? Give us a hypothetical. Obviously, you can't talk about specific patient situations, but you can give us, you know, an amalgam. You can give us a construct, or just sort of a, you know, maybe some kind of strategy. You can do that, can't you? We're waiting this whole time. Okay. All right, guys. I want to know from you guys. So I'm going to take a straw poll in the chat. If you want me to go further with this, put a 1 in the chat. If you think this is enough or you're bored already, put a 2. Okay, so 1 if you want me to continue, a 2 if you say this is about enough. I'm going to go at least for another 7 minutes or so to the bottom of the hour, regardless. All right?
You know, and a lot of science that can be useful here.
Yeah, and that leads me into my next question, really. You critique the silence about whiteness in most therapies and the psychology field in general, and you write how therapists rarely think to question the role of racial identity in their white patients' lives. I'm wondering if you could say more about that.
Yes, please do, because honestly, that's probably the core of what I've been waiting to hear about from this talk. If everything prior to this was foreplay, let's get down to business, shall we? Let's see. I got 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1. Okay, I'll go for a little bit longer, guys. We'll see.
Well, I work with a colleague and a friend named Francesca Maxime, and I'm going to recommend her website at the end of this because she has a ton of great resources. But you know, she talks a lot about how, you know, in psychology and in therapy, like we have this opportunity to kind of explore things with like racial injustice with clients, but the therapist has to do their own work first.
We have an opportunity in situations where we find ourselves with someone who is seeking help, someone who is in their most vulnerable state, to instill them with a racially charged social ideology. Just me, or does that sound awfully sinister? Might just be me. All right, I've seen a lot of ones, so I'll go for at least an extra 15 minutes, okay, after the bottom of the hour. I don't know if I'll do the whole thing, but all right.
Like the therapist can't kind of do work if they don't have a sense that they have something to guide you into. I mean, that's why we have all this training, right? Like where you don't just go into therapy. I mean, you shouldn't just go into therapy, especially in something as complicated as sort of like racial socialization and racial trauma.
Is that what your patients are coming to you for? I mean, I keep coming back to this. If your patient comes to you saying, I'm having anxiety over racial trauma, then it would be relevant, I suppose, to start going down that path with the patient. Or, because I'm not hearing anything otherwise, or do you make discussing or therapying about racial trauma and racial justice, etc., boilerplate for your form of therapy with your patients who happen to be white? What do you, or are you a specialist? Is the only thing that you deal with is racial trauma as a PhD? You know, with all that training you've got, presumably all that schooling and all that professional, etc. Okay.
You know.
No, I don't know.
And yet that's where we are as a field. Like there's very little training.
So where we are as a field, there is very little training in racial trauma. Well, now you're going to have to define what racial trauma is. What does someone look like who has experienced racial trauma? I know. I keep asking for details and I'm not going to get them.
And the training that there is, I think, is really like there is a lot of work that's been done around sort of multicultural therapy and multicultural psychology and trying to understand how to give culturally competent treatment to people of color.
You know, because the therapy that I would use on one person versus another radically shifts based on their skin color. You know, because skin color defines the way you think. Just sit with that notion for a second, would you? All right.
And to different populations who are not sort of from the dominant culture. But in terms of like sort of looking at the other side of it, which is like, what is it that white clients need to stop creating the conditions that, you know, are traumatizing and that are creating structural racial injustice and economic injustice and all the different kinds of injustices that are so endemic in our society? There's nothing, you know.
What do white people need to stop being villainous monsters? Effectively. That's the question. When a client comes in and sits down on my couch, what do I need to give them to stop them from being a villainous monster, which they obviously are because of their skin color? That is an interesting question. So tell me, doctor, what do white people need from you as a therapist to stop them from being villainous monsters?
You know, there really is literally nothing. organized,
Oh,
even though within our field there's like a long history of looking at these issues and kind of doing science and kind of like exploring and trying out different interventions or just theorizing about it.
How do you intervene on someone being white? I would love to see that episode of Intervention. Right? On a special episode of Intervention, Jeff Van Vonderen confronts whiteness. You know, there's a lot of people here who love you and they want to get you back, but they feel like they're losing you. So, you know, they're going to say what they have to say. You're going to say what you have to say, and then we're done. Okay? Gary, I've watched you be white your whole life. And it breaks my heart to know that you exist in a world of privilege and that you contribute to oppression. You're being given a wonderful gift today to try to solve this problem and rejoin the world. Will you take this opportunity to get rid of your whiteness that you can't get rid of? Please. Yeah, I watched a lot of Intervention. Okay.
But the interesting thing is that I think without sort of intending to, our field has also touched on a lot of this stuff, like, for example, cognitive dissonance.
Oh, God. Can we please leave cognitive dissonance? Every time you say that, I know I'm about to get a whole just again.
The Zimbardo Project, or, you know, putting people, you know, in the, you know, the prison cells with the prison guards and seeing what happens, giving people, you know, doing like a play acting of a prison situation and seeing what happens.
What? Those kind of experiments examine human behavior and power structures, giving arbitrary power to one group versus another and seeing what they do with it. It's human behavior, Milgram experiments, and so on and so forth. It's got nothing to do with skin color. Power dynamics are universal. Human psychology is universal. No matter what language they're speaking, no matter what the culture they came from.
Yeah.
Okay.
You also write that as awareness builds, right, that white racial awareness builds, the other side of the cycle starts to spin. And I'm wondering if you could say more about what that other side of the cycle is.
Okay. Yeah. Tell us.
Well, I guess like there is sort of this greater understanding in this moment, maybe than ever before, that like when it comes to any kind of injustice in the US, but I think this could be quite cross-cultural too.
Any kind of injustice in the US. Okay. Any kind of injustice. Any. Okay.
There will be gains made by people who are more marginalized, you know, for more rights, more access, you know. Well, I guess where we should start before that, like, so there will be these, you know, I don't know.
No, I don't know. Give us an example. Give us something specific. I don't know. You're the expert. You're supposed to know. Tell us.
Sort of where it's the chicken or the egg, but there's like oppression and then there's pushing back against oppression, and there can be like victories in that.
Like what? Give us an example. Good Christ. What? You know, if there's one common thread from TEDx's to now, it's the lack of specificity. You know, talking about big concepts, but not at least giving us an active example, even a hypothetical based on your personal experience. You know, like I say, if you're a doctor, you're a medical professional, you can't talk about specific patient cases. And okay, fine. But, you know, conceivably, you've seen enough now that you can construct for us a reasonable facsimile of a real world example. Why can't we do that here? At any point, why are you unable to give us any specificity on anything? The most specific you've gotten on any point so far is by saying whiteness is just the biological result of melanin. Full stop. That was as close as you got, and that was as based in the temporal plane as I could have hoped for. Anything?
You know, like we could look at
you know,
the slave rebellions and then the Civil War.
Okay.
You know,
the Civil War. Oh, the Civil War, where a whole bunch of white people killed a whole bunch of other white people. And the end result of that was working towards the end of slavery. Okay. All right. I'm holding that thought in my head.
And then Reconstruction, and then the Civil Rights Movement, and now Black Lives Matter.
I did a video a while back where there was a comparison made between the Civil Rights Movement led by Martin Luther King Jr. and the Black Lives Matter movement, and they did their best, their utmost, to try to bring these two ideologies, these two movements, onto an equal playing field as being equally effective, equally righteous, equally ethical, and they failed miserably. As try as they might, their cognitive dissonance did not succeed. But you go, doctor.
But in between those cycles of kind of like where there's gains in kind of acknowledging that everyone has certain basic human rights, and like kind of like a more equal distribution of resources, which I would sort of equate to like mental health in an individual, right? Like, so in between those gains, there are then these backlashes and these backslidings, and like the kind of like attempt to reassert a more kind of like top-down power.
Sure. Change takes time. I'll give you that. Radical change takes time to settle in. Yeah. Okay. And the civil rights movement wasn't successful in a lot of ways. Do we live in a perfect society? No. And we probably never will. Do we live in an effectively better society today than we did 60 years ago? Heck yeah. Are we going to acknowledge that? Probably not.
People stay in their places. Like, you don't get to be fully human. Only some of us get to be fully human. Some of us have to be at the bottom. Some of us have to be at the top. Like,
have to be? Some of us? Who are you talking about? Specificity. I mean, I can imagine who you're talking about, but I hate, assuming things about what people say, assuming motives, mind reading, and so on. So can you at all get more specific, doctor? Or do you somehow know inherently that if you start getting specific, if you start making grand statements of fact using the specificity I think you want to, you're going to sound like a raging racist? Maybe that's the cognitive dissonance you're running up against. Maybe.
So there's this sort of back and forth, and it's sort of like a manifestation collectively of an individual psychology. If someone's like, if you have in treatment with someone and you're working with them to undo some of their more self-destructive patterns, you see this kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of.
Because it's a process. Change takes time. It's not a light switch. In people, in societies. Is that really so surprising to someone who is a trained, presumably, psychologist of a kind? That a person's ego, talking on the micro level here, is going to resist change or resist a notion that their sense of self is flawed or incorrect in some way, or unhealthy, let's say? Is that really that surprising? Is it then that surprising that on the macro level, societies who have a certain societal or cultural identity would just instantly change at the drop of a dime? Is that really that shocking? What?
A pattern, like there's this 1 step back is the resistance.
Yeah.
Like the part of us that does not want to be healthy, the part of us that does not want to be kind of more free.
No, it's the part of us that is not used to a notion that goes against how we've operated for a long time. Even if it's a way of operating that we know inherently is unhealthy. There's fear there. There's the unknown. There's a comfort zone, even in misery. Now that was, I was talking about this earlier, this part of the problem with what took me so long to finally seek help, right? Because my misery was predictable. It was mine. I owned it. As terrible as it was, as lousy as it made for a living experience, at least it was familiar. At least I knew where it began and where it ended. And that sense of comfort in my own misery prevented me from seeking change. Because change was, like so many things in life, unknown. And I didn't know if it'd be effective. I didn't know if I'd be giving something up. I didn't know if I'd be reducing myself in some way or harming myself within the strength of my own misery. It's not about, it's not always about something villainous. It's not always about something where we know we're a bad guy or something. Sometimes it's just about what's familiar and what isn't. And even in the worst situations, some people can find comfort in the predictability. Right? Come on, doctor. Come on. I'm not a PhD. I don't have your training. But I don't whittle it all. I whittle that one reflex you whittle down to resisting being a healthier person or a better person in the sense that you're talking ethics and morals here. Come on.
And, do we have that because we have some kind of, kind of like self-hating kind of internal structure that's been imposed on us by, whatever the forces are in our socialization and our culture that kind of is like a self-sabotaging, self-defeating kind of, organization that then pushes back against like sort of this more full-bodied mental health. Like, I'm not sure, but I think
society did not impose upon me the mentality that I wanted to handle my stuff on my own. I've always been a very independent person. I've always taken pride in being able to manage with myself without a whole lot of help. And I've always been a little skeptical of people who I don't know coming in and trying to tell me how I should think or what I should do or what's right for me and so on. So when I started experiencing anxiety, when I started having reactions to things that were far beyond rational, I did everything I could to manage it on my own. I tried not to make it somebody else's problem. Because watching my father operate when I was growing up, he, whether he meant to or not, and I don't think he did, but regardless, his problem became my problem. His inability to manage what was going on in his head spilled out over into the lives and the well-being of myself, my sister, my mother, and others. And I did not want to be that person. I was dedicated to not becoming that person. Not becoming someone who couldn't handle their own garbage and who would take it out on others unjustifiably. That is what drove me. It drove me to be as good a person as I could be and manage my own stuff and not make it anybody else's problem. That was me. I did that. I made that choice. I was working to be a good person by not letting my garbage become someone else's problem. But after a long time of fighting that, it became more than I could handle and my life was not enjoyable. So finally, I gave in to the unknown and I lucked out. I did. I was very fortunate that the first medication I was assigned worked. Because I knew from several people in my life who have had similar or worse problems, the horror stories of taking the wrong medication or experimenting with their brain chemistry on different medications and what that can do to you over time. But I lucked out. I won't deny it. But it had nothing to do with my skin color. It had everything to do with just the happenstance of my body chemistry and the medication I was assigned. And I did that for me. I did that for my sense of well-being. I did that for, conceivably, the people around me's sense of well-being. Because I didn't want to be a bad guy by letting stuff I couldn't control start controlling me. That's why I did that. Society didn't impose that on me. Being a person who cared about the people around me, who wanted to operate without help. Oh yeah, that individualism, that rugged individualism, that's such a terrible thing, I guess.
On a collective level, there really is a way in which like the European influence is often to kind of like, is essentially to kind of create a very unsustainable, uncomfortable, unhealthy kind of social organization where there's like a few people at the top and most people at the bottom.
Yeah, that's inherently European. That's inherently white. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to end this here. I've gone on for an hour and 45 minutes, and I'm only about halfway through the actual podcast. A link to the full podcast is in the description. I don't know, guys. Obviously, I've had a reaction to this based on my own experiences and what I would expect from a therapist and so on, but also just the absolute just malarkey that this trained professional has been spewing out that makes no sense, applies to nothing, no specificity, and is just a repetition over and over again of the same words, the same accusations, the same assessments. And then the insanity of looking at some terrible thing and saying, that's my symbolic self. I have to associate myself and who I am and how I think with that terrible thing and feel bad about it. I can't imagine what kind of life one must lead if that's how you look at the world. If that's how you look at yourself. You assess yourself as some pitiable, terrible, inherently sinful creature who constantly has to make penance for no other reason than you happen to be born the way you were. Well, what a terrible life that must be. And yet, that way of thinking apparently is being leveraged into a profession that is then imparted onto people looking for help, people looking to feel better about themselves or get a handle on things they may not have control over by being told that they're inherently bad over something they have no control over, whether it's relevant to the problem or not, apparently. I don't know. And this is what's going on in the mental health industry, as it were. These two individuals are representative of an aspect of thinking in psychology today. They are representative of people who are effectively ingraining into others a sense of self-hatred, or, depending on their skin color, may ingraining into them a sense of inherent victimization. I don't know. But it's disturbing. It might be more disturbing, or at least slightly equitably disturbing, as listening to an educator of small children talking about the same concepts as stuff that they would do and impart upon children as part of the work. But here we are. I'll give a couple minutes, if you guys have anything you'd like to say or add into the conversation. For those of you listening in the future, I'm more than happy to read your comments on this and any other thoughts you may have. This was a diversion from the usual TEDx sort of format because it was something from an old subject of mine. You can find that playlist on my YouTube channel. It's called Gnarly Counseling. You may have to click on the created playlists tag or link when you go to the playlist tab, because they don't actually display all the playlists necessarily. I'm not quite sure how to fix that. And I'll be adding this one to that as well for continuity. Let's see. Midnight Exile. There is no cultural system that has imparted more personal liberty on its participants than European descendant Western society. Not one. It could be true. I'm not a historian or psychologist, but I mean, if my trying to handle my own stuff is a value instilled in me from long dead white people that I never knew, rather than my parents themselves and their own personal experiences, all right. I've known a lot of kids who are white who don't have that same mentality, so it's not inherent. Kieverdam Scribelight, do you plan on doing a part 2? Maybe. I don't know. I got to take a break from this for now, at least. And I don't know if it makes any sense to do a part 2. We'll see. I'll think about it. I know the timestamp here, 30 minutes and 4 seconds on the file that I'm working with. So I'll think about it. If people want me to, I will. I'm not reflexively inclined to do so, but I'm not unwilling to do so if you guys would like to hear more. Let's see. Leaves of Bread. Civics that is taught in school is mostly how to be an activist. These days, yeah, especially if you listen to some of the teachers that I've covered on Curriculum of Fear. They seem to believe it is their role to train activists, whether they say it that bluntly or not. And several have, not all of them do. Advocatus Diaboli, collectivists talking about freedom always makes me chuckle a little. Yeah, somebody who says all people like this, think this way, must be treated that way. But let's talk about liberty. Let's talk about freedom. Let's talk about individualism or something, or that can be solved. I mean, and I guess I'll end with this. A person who talks with such certitude about what to expect from someone based on an aspect of their makeup they cannot change, who then promotes themselves as someone who is there to help that person through this problem, to make them fit better into the world and to feel better about themselves by solving the burdens of this thing that cannot be changed. And I already know how you think and operate because it's inherent to your makeup. Hasn't she already just made herself irrelevant? Isn't the pursuit that she says that she's done all this training and schooling for entirely futile? I'll leave you with that. Everyone, thank you so much for coming today for this little, like I say, diversion from the norm. Thank you so much for your attendance. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you so much for your generosity. Hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. If you'd like to hear more from me, or Ranting Monkey, or Satsu 2 Cents, you can find all three of us tomorrow, Monday night, on Satsu 2 Cents' channel at 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, for the Lords of the Night, where we will talk about the news of the day, news stories you submit, what we've been up to on the intertubes, and then your questions and comments. I may be back tomorrow with the TED Excellence. We'll see. But until then, guys, I hope you are all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.